Welcome to NARAL's The Morning After. Each Thursday, our podcast brings you the latest on reproductive health care, progressive politics, and the fight to keep abortion safe and legal. NARAL's The Morning After is a production of NARAL Pro-Choice Ohio. Find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at ProChoiceOH. Enjoy the show.
Hi, I'm Jaime.
I'm Elaina.
And I'm Gabe. It's been a very long while.
I haven't been on for like a really long time, I feel like.
I know.
Yes, you.
I took a vacation last week. The week before that, we recorded our previous discussion on religion and the pro-choice movement. And then all hell broke loose.
You go on vacation and the world falls apart, Gabe.
You know, it's the weirdest thing to have like national things happen when you're on the road in other parts of the country. And we were traveling through the South.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, oh, crap, everything's happening down here.
Yeah. We drove to North Carolina like the day after September 11th.
Oh, wow.
Drove through Norfolk, Virginia, which was really interesting because it's like the largest naval base in the Eastern Seaboard. But yeah, I remember feeling kind of the same way, that it like you feel very disconnected when you're driving across the country when like big, huge things are happening.
Yes. Yeah, we got down there and opened up Twitter primarily and found that in Charlottesville, Virginia, white supremacists, Ku Klux Klan, neo-Nazis, people who worship green frog memes. I don't quite get that one.
Hadn't heard that one.
The Pepe the Frog, I don't know. White supremacists held rallies, consecutive rallies in Charlottesville, Virginia.
Mm-hmm.
The second rally was met with opposition by people who don't like white supremacists.
Should be everyone, but
right. But who you know actually take a stand against them.
Mm-hmm.
And in the process of protesting against them, or as they were protesting against the white supremacists, a guy from our state, from Toledo, drove a car into the crowd, killing Heather Hare, who had just posted on her Facebook page that if you're not paying attention,
if you're not enraged or something,
if you're not enraged, you must not be paying attention. Which is a quote, once we get it correctly, I think needs to be attributed to her now.
Yes.
So,
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I ended up writing a blog piece about that because, I mean, she gave her life for this, for being an ally and standing up and recognizing that all lives have value. And, I mean, it was heartbreaking what happened in Charlottesville, but not surprising. I mean, this is a legacy we've been living with. You know, this of racism and colonialism, and it all just came to a head. And I think now people are paying attention, but we shouldn't have to come to that.
Yeah. I had seen something where they had planned another like 11 rallies or something like that, and they held one in Boston, and they were outnumbered like 100-1. It sounded like, and then they canceled all the other ones. But that just, in some ways that's great because they're not doing these public displays, but it doesn't mean that all those people went away. They're just underground, which actually on like a safety kind of front makes you even a little more concerned about where they're going to pop up next.
Right.
But yeah.
Looking at that, there was a quote which I wrote down so that we'd get this one correct. This is from Susan Bro, who's Heather Hare's mom. She says, "I'd rather have my child, but by golly, if I got to give her up, we're going to make it count." So, I sort of saw from my vacation spot, I sort of saw four main themes or ideas that came out throughout that week. There was the actual in the street violence that cost somebody their life. There was the discussion over statues that was going on, because that was the origin of the first thing was, these white supremacists wanted to make sure that a statue of Thomas Jefferson wasn't removed. And then after all of this happened, there were all of these responses in the media or from elected officials. And the one that was in the media that got the most attention was this goofball thing that Tina Fey did, coming out on the Saturday Night Live, weekday show that they got now, talking about how everyone should just eat lots of cake.
And scream into sheet cake.
Their sheet cake. But then, more serious responses came from, politicians like Sherrod Brown and Rob Portman and John Kasich, basically everybody except for Donald Trump, who couldn't somehow get it through his head that an actual condemnation of these actions would be warranted.
Until they like slapped him and made him stand in front of a teleprompter and read words that he just like completely undid the very next day. So
right.
And then he did it again in Phoenix. I don't know if you guys caught this, but when he started talking about the violence in the streets perpetrated by these thugs, which is like one of the most racially coded terms on the planet. So he was trying to act like he was talking about how white supremacists and neo-Nazis and everyone are bad, but then he calls them thugs,
right?
Which to that entire crowd meant black men in the street. So he really just cannot get away from this crazy place that he inhabits in his brain,
right?
That just, I just don't know. It's completely foreign to my brain. So it's hard to understand why he just can't understand why it's important to condemn very closely, especially when he makes such a big, huge deal about calling Islamic terrorism radical Islamic terrorists rather than terrorists. You know, he made that big, huge deal about that with Hillary Clinton on the campaign trail. Like, she won't call them radical Islamic terrorists.
Right. Obama was accused of the same thing over and over again.
But he won't condemn by name white supremacists, neo-Nazis, and the KKK.
Right.
And they're emboldened by him.
Yes.
I mean, they know their own kind.
Yeah. I mean, David Duke was like, I loved his statement.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, and I thought it was kind of interesting to look at all of our friends, you know, people on the left, of you know, at varying degrees, and exactly how they reacted to all of this. I bring up the Tina Fey thing because that was like actually the one argument that I got in with people was how much importance, you know, reacting to these sort of things are, you know, the comedy satirization of these things. You know, that sort of look at it, I find to be completely unimportant. Some people thought it was great. Some people thought it was terrible. I'm like, nobody's being saved or killed by Tina Fey and her cake. You know, people actually are dying in the streets. How important a statue is, you know, and there's statues coming down all across. Just today in Ohio, in Crawford County, a statue got beheaded, Colonel Crawford, who apparently was responsible for the massacre of Native Americans. He was, you know, one of the founding fathers of the state of Ohio. In my neighborhood over on the west side, we've got a Civil War camp that started as a Union training camp and then became a Confederate prisoner of war camp. And so there's a bunch of graves there of Confederate soldiers who died in Ohio. Somebody took the head off the statue, you know, there. And I kind of feel a little bit the same way about the statues as I do about Tina Fey and her sheet cake. I'm like, the statues, it's, you know, I understand the importance of taking some of these down. I wouldn't want a statue of Robert E. Lee outside my kid's school or, you know, in my neighborhood. But then I look at, you know, Paul Ryan and his tax plan, and I kind of feel like all of this discussion has taken away from looking at what he wants to do with people's health care and what he wants to do with the nation's tax reform and what the bigger implications are in terms of what sort of government services can be available to people if there's, you know, adequate tax funding or not. And I think Paul Ryan has the potential to actually kill more people in this country through his policies than...
I go back and forth on that one. I mean, yes, Paul Ryan's a disaster, and the tax policies
are dangerous.
Yes,
and we're not talking about it because we're talking about sheet cake and statues.
But the statues and the systematic racism that exists across the board in our country also kill a crap ton of people, and those statues symbolize that. And without taking them down, and without fixing the structures that allowed for these statues to go up, because I was actually just looking at something the other day about when these statues all went up.
Right.
Because somebody was making a comment that one that came down, wherever it was, in North Carolina, where like the thousands and thousands of people like came to the police station to admit that they were the ones to take it down.
That was awesome.
That was awesome. But like, you can see that just crumple. Like if it was like solid brass made right after the Civil War, it would not have crumpled like that. And their argument was that it was mass produced because the vast majority of these went up like as Jim Crow was coming in to be at the turn of the century, well after the Civil War. And then there was another little resurgence in the civil rights era. So every time Black people try to get power, we put up more Confederate statues to tell them that they didn't have power. So, yeah.
No, I mean, that's the reason why Trump doesn't get it. He's blind to his own power and privilege. And so when we're talking about Black and brown bodies and, you know, the harm, that those statues are violence. It is a means of terror to remind them to put them in their place. And so we have to pay attention to all of it, including, you know, budget proposals that absolutely continue to harm people's lives.
Right. I think the key there is the word "and" in that sentence. And, you know, we can't have all these statues come down and say, well, we got rid of the statues.
No, that's not, that's definitely not going to
I worry that that's what's going to happen because people are going to say, oh, we've made progress. We've done this. And now we're going to move on. And all that'll have happened is some statues got taken down, which does have value.
Yeah. But it's not the solution, no.
But yeah, you know, the kids in my neighborhood's elementary school, you know, their school lunch program that feeds kids doesn't hinge on whether or not there's a statue in our neighborhood. And you know, the teachers, if there's a certain number of, you know, students per classroom, that doesn't change if there's a statue in our neighborhood. And these are the sort of things about actually putting, you know, meals in mouths and getting them access to doctors and, you know, neighborhood clinics. This is the stuff that I think actually has the potential to really, you know, improve lives, to save lives. And we lose it because we're like, oh.
Yeah, but I see it similar actually to the infant mortality debate. Because, you know, we want to do some stuff over here that might help a few, like the safe sleep practices and baby boxes and those kinds of things. But even with all those things in place, structural racism still means that Black babies die at, I think it's at least double, if not 3 times the rate that white babies die. And so while it's okay to do these things over here that I kind of see as Paul Ryan's budget, the like safe sleep, the putting money into infant mortality programs and, you know, moms to be and all those things are critical and important. They're not going to fix the reason why a African-American woman with a PhD has the same infant mortality, actually a larger rate of infant mortality than a white woman without a high school education.
Right.
Like if that was just a poverty, we can fix it with like equaling the playing field thing, that wouldn't happen. So I kind of see it the same way with the statues. It's the whole like, yeah, we need to pay attention to these, but we also need to pay attention to this thing over here.
Right. Yeah, and you know, I don't want to let John Kasich and Rob Portman off the hook just because they made statements against Donald Trump. And
frankly, that was what made me actually kind of sad and pissed off too, was that there weren't statements against the thing that happened. It was statements against Donald Trump's reaction to it. And that actually was on the Democratic side too. There was a lot more talk about how bad Donald Trump was than how bad Charlottesville was. And that was really disappointing.
Right. There were comments in the state of Ohio from one state legislator specifically that we've got pulled up here from Candace Keller. We've talked about her before. Representative Keller's day job is that she's the head of a crisis pregnancy center that gets paid money by the taxpayers to lie to women. She put up something on Facebook and said that there's a statue of Bill Clinton in Arkansas. He glorified adultery and perjury. She goes on, yada, yada, yada. Martin Luther King was against gay marriage. Will those statues remain standing? The Democratic Party invented white nationalism. I was expecting those with a discerning spirit to understand what is happening here.
Maybe she should try.
Right. You know, Representative Keller, we've seen her name in the headlines before when she appeared on a podcast run by a white supremacist group and made some racist statements about President Obama on her Facebook page. You know, these sort of shameful statements aren't limited to nationally known political figures. So,
yeah.
The other thing, mentioning Obama, is, somebody put up the picture of him crossing the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, which I remember when that happened a few years ago, and I thought, oh, this is a nice little event. It's a terrific little photo op, and they're crossing the bridge, and it doesn't really mean much. But then you see the pictures of Obama and that entire community, then side by side with these people, Nazis with tiki torches. And suddenly it's like, oh, wow, that really, there is serious significance behind, behind actions like that at the time kind of felt like, feel good moments. Not that it, not that it was important, but now it sort of has this gravitas, I think, behind it. So
nothing says white nationalism by like using a fake cultural appropriation of Polynesian culture.
Right. Right. The reactions keep coming. Cleveland Browns, several of their players took a knee, including one player who's the first white NFL player to take a knee during the national anthem. So, take pride in having the Browns be from Ohio and having them have a good show of solidarity there.
Might be the only good thing about the Browns.
We'll take it.
And they are like technically like 2-0 right now, but it's all preseason. But,
yes, the preseason stuff. And also in the NFL, Colin Kaepernick is still, not signed by a team. Richard Sherman, the Seattle Seahawks player, who is terrific to listen to when he has comments, he said, hey, eventually the fans are going to demand answers when players worse off than Colin Kaepernick are starting, and he's sitting on the, not even on the bench. He's not in the games. But I think as more and more players continue to show solidarity with the Black Lives Matter movement on the field, there's going to be more and more questions as to why he's not in the game. So
we'll see, I guess. I mean, it's just, again, it's another one of those moments of solidarity, but also how much attention is being played to like the first white guy who did it, and those kinds of things also,
right,
which is an interesting thing to watch as well.
Right. Yeah. And then Trump, wrapping up the week, or maybe into this week, gave a just terrible speech in Arizona, which was followed by the police using tear gas canisters in the street. So immediately, the display of excessive police violence there. And during this speech, he strongly hinted that he might be providing a pardon for the Sheriff Joe Arpaio from Arizona, who's been really the figurehead of racist policies in the state of Arizona, anti-immigrant, just anti-brown people policies. So I think this will be another flashpoint coming if and when Trump decides to pardon this guy. So
yeah, his speech was over the top ridiculous on about 5 million levels. But yeah, like, the governor of the state and the mayor of the city had asked him not to announce that pardon there. So he like did everything. He was like a kid. He's totally a toddler. Like, you draw the line down the middle of your kids' bedrooms and say, you can't, go over onto Jimmy's side. And the other kid gets his toes right up to the line. I'm not crossing the line. I mean, that's exactly what he did. It's like, I didn't announce the pardon, but I was like, I'm going to pardon him.
Right.
Or, they asked me not to, chastise this state's senators by name, but I'm going to talk about that guy who was a POW and that other guy that nobody even knows his, like,
yeah. And then the rest of the time just attacks the press, which is becoming really scary.
Yeah.
George Stephanopoulos was talking about it, and he says that he really fears for many of his colleagues who, as you know, they're at these rallies and Trump points the finger back at the press podium in the back of the room, they feel, you know, thousands of heads turn their way, and the only thing dividing them is basically a rope, you know, a simple railing. And it feels like it's just a matter of time before Trump actually tells people to physically attack the press rather than just yell things at them.
Yeah. I don't think he's going to have to like physically tell them to. I think somebody is going to, like, I could just see kind of that crowd mentality that builds at some of those. But it's just when you see when they drag out the protesters a couple of times, like Black Lives Matter and stuff, have protested Trump events, and how, as the police or security are dragging that person out, how the people in that crowd treat them.
Right.
So yeah, I could very easily see at one of those places, you know, somebody say, "Get him," after Trump says one of their things about how all these guys over here are liars, and
yeah,
God knows what's going to happen.
I mean, it's his dog whistle. It's why the KKK and neo-Nazis are coming out in force now. So I see that happening with the press as well.
Right. Trump's White House is preparing to actually put in place some of these transgender bans. Speaking of the other ways that Donald Trump is full of hate, a transgender ban on military personnel. This, you know, was something that we saw him tweet before. The Department of Defense sort of said, listen, we don't take orders from tweets. If you want something, you're going to have to actually talk to us directly through the proper channels. Apparently that's happening now.
Yeah. And it sounds like it's going to be on new enlisters. So it won't actively, it'll leave the actively getting rid of people out of the military to the military leaders. So it'll be interesting to see how it will affect those already enlisted in the military versus those who would join.
Right. Tammy Duckworth, Senator Duckworth, she put out a terrific statement that I thought sort of won the debate for the time being. She said, when I was bleeding to death in my Black Hawk helicopter after I was shot down, I didn't care if the American troops risking their lives to save me were gay, straight, transgender, black, white, or brown. All that mattered was that they didn't leave me behind. If you're willing to risk your life for our country and you can do the job, you should be able to serve, no matter your gender identity or sexual orientation.
Yep, that kind of says it all.
Great statement.
He was.
So that is the national news. We, of course, are focused here on what's happening in the state of Ohio. This week we had the second hearing on the Down syndrome abortion ban. This is a bill that we heard the first time in 2015. You know, when we heard the testimony the first time through, the Toledo Blade sided against it in an editorial, as did the New York Times in an editorial. Representative Stephanie Howse and Representative Janine Boyd wrote a joint op-ed against this proposal. We'll provide links for all three of those in the show notes for people to read those. Just a horrific, immoral proposal to tell women that they're not allowed to have an abortion if they receive a positive prenatal test for Down syndrome.
Well, it also just highlights how kind of ridiculous the other side is on this issue, because they don't believe abortion is right in any case. So to single this one very specific thing out and say, really, women in this case can't get it, and start blaming, you know, calling people who believe that abortion should be the decision of the woman in the family, you know, eugenicists, and, you know, people who just want to see all, you know, everyone with a disability not exist in the world, is, you know, completely disingenuous and completely incorrect. I mean, this is about making sure that families have the resources that they need, healthcare and otherwise, to make the best decision for their family and their situation. And we had families say that the last time around too. We can put those in the show notes too, all the blog posts and everything we had from last year.
Yes.
About families who said, I have a kid with Down syndrome. I love my child to death. I would never like trade this experience for the world, but that was my family's decision, and everyone needs to have this decision, you know, left up to them and not pushed on them by the government.
Right.
Yeah.
So this was the second hearing. This was proponent testimony. We will likely be seeing a third hearing scheduled for opponent testimony. That's our side. So we'll be able to provide witnesses to explain to the committee, probably in the next month or so, exactly why this bill is such a terrible idea. That happens as the legislature returns from their incredibly long summer break.
Not really long enough because I came back last week, but yeah, whatever.
Right. They're not all coming back because we've just heard that Representative Margaret Condit is stepping away from her position. She will be leaving office after three terms in the House, which has included her being a lead sponsor for the most recent bill that actually was enacted into law by John Kasich to defund Planned Parenthood.
Yes. And then she was also the sponsor of one of this year's versions of the fetal tissue bills as well. So that kind of leaves that bill up in the air. I mean, it's co-sponsored by Representative Bill Patman from Cleveland, so it's not completely dead or anything, but she was the person who was mainly pushing it. So it'll be interesting to see where that goes. And then I assume we'll probably also see the method ban come back, the bill the Senate passed right before they left for the summer. So stay tuned. It'll be a fun fall.
Right. The method ban was the bill where we had all of our supporters come dressed as handmaids.
Yes.
So, I'm not quite sure if the handmaids will be back, but our supporters absolutely will. To make sure that members of the legislature, hear exactly how terrible that was. Elaina, you are a handmaid.
Yeah. I mean,
planning on returning for committee, I assume.
A second appearance, doubtful.
Yeah.
But
doubtful as a handmaid, but
as a handmaid, yes.
Yeah.
But definitely as
but you'll be in the room, right?
Yes.
Okay. And then the last thing about state legislation or state politics that we wanted to discuss was the Supreme Court case. State of Ohio Supreme Court is hearing the appeal by Capital Care, Toledo's last abortion clinic. They will be making their argument before the state's high court on September 12th at 9 a.m. to explain why the transfer agreement requirement that John Kasich has put into place that threatens to shut their doors, why this is an undue burden on women in the Toledo community, why it's basically an unconstitutional proposal.
Well, that's one of the arguments. Actually, there's three arguments. That's actually the least argument that she's actually making because it's state court. So it's talking a lot about how it actually doesn't go along with the state law and state constitution. So her main arguments are actually that by delegating the state's authority to give licenses to hospitals, so a hospital basically now controls whether or not an abortion clinic gets a license or not, because if they can't get that transfer agreement from the hospital or can't get a doctor to sign this variance form, it's the doctors and the hospitals deciding whether or not there's a license, not the state Department of Health.
Wow.
So that delegation is unconstitutional, and I'm now completely blanking on the other state argument. But so that is happening on the 12th. There's one way to fix this, and it's not the state Supreme Court because they're not with us. The state Supreme Court has a 5-seat majority with Republicans, and then there's only 2 Dems, and one of the 2 Dems is a anti-choice Dem. So
cute.
And actually, going back to our earlier conversations about the Browns, that one of the state Supreme Court, I think it's William O'Neill, this week had a tweet and a whole big statement about how he was ashamed to be from the same state as the Browns, and he was not going to watch them anymore because that was a unpatriotic, stupid thing to do. And then he also talked about the military draft, and so I guess he doesn't understand that their draft went away at the end of the Vietnam War. So yeah, that's another one of your state Supreme Court justices.
I hate these arguments that they're being unpatriotic by basically just being still and silent during the national anthem. I'm like, there's people out in the street with Confederate flags and Nazi flags. And if you want to talk about anti-American things, that's the actually anti-American thing.
We kind of went to war with both of those groups.
Right. And beat them.
Yes. details. Actually, protesting is kind of the most patriotic thing you could. I mean, that's kind of what our country was based on.
Right.
But
Trump says he likes winners, but here his supporters are holding up these 2 losing flags.
Yes. I mean, there's a reason why people in Germany fly the Confederate flag, because the Nazi flag's been outlawed.
Oy.
But back to Toledo, the Supreme Court. So the only way we can really save the clinic is to get them a transfer agreement. So our big, huge push right now is to call Randy Ustra. He's the CEO of ProMedica, which is the big, huge hospital chain up in Northwest Ohio, and tell them to grant a transfer agreement with Capital Care Toledo. So everybody get a pen or pencil out. Let's give you a second here. And write down this phone number. It's 567-585-3984. And we'll put it in the show notes too.
Right.
So call that number and tell the person who answers it that you're calling to urgently request ProMedica sign a transfer agreement with Capital Care. We need safe and affordable abortion care in our community.
Right.
So again, 567-585-3984. Randy Ustra.
And we know what ProMedica's response is. They're saying that, hey, we provide care anyways. We don't need this transfer agreement in order to provide care.
Yeah.
La-di-da.
Well, they signed them with us, like gastric places. They sign them with other ambulatory surgical facilities. It'd be fine if they didn't sign anything and say, I don't need to sign this for anybody because we don't need this. But they sign it with literally every other ambulatory surgical facility in Northwest Ohio because they're really the only hospital that exists up there. So
the clinic needs it. The patients who go to this clinic need the transfer agreement.
Only because of license, not because of any other safety issue.
Right.
Yes.
But because of Kasich bureaucracy. So ProMedica is trying to say that they're remaining neutral. They're not. There's no longer neutrality. John Kasich forced ProMedica into this position when he signed this transfer agreement rule into law. So if they want to say that they want to be neutral, then they need to talk to Kasich about ending this rule.
Yeah.
As soon as this bill was signed, neutrality ceased to exist. They have to take a side. They should side with the women. The clinic will be able to continue to operate. They're not providing any financial assistance to the clinic. They're not providing any services to the clinic. They're signing a piece of paper, which in my mind, lets them wipe their hands of it and walk away and say, hey, we signed it. It's now back between the clinic, the state that regulates it, and the women who are seeking care there.
Yep. Exactly.
So
call them, make them do it. Because really it's the only way to save that clinic up there.
Right. Okay. So that is an event. So we'll call it at the beginning of our Let's Get It On.
We're not going to talk about Willie Parker.
Oh, Willie Parker. Light it up.
I didn't go. I was going to give that to Elaina because you were the one who went to his thing in the church the other night.
Great event. Oh my goodness. Such a good soul. I mean, unheard of, right? Like hundreds of people gathering in a church to talk about the dignity of women's choices. And here's Dr. Parker, a Southern Christian abortion provider that's just made that his life work, to argue for the moral choice. And he does that. He lives it day in and day out. I mean, the man used to have, like a penthouse in Hawaii, and he gave it all up because he realized that as a Christian, it was his moral duty to provide abortions to women who needed it, because of complicated or unwanted, unintended pregnancies. And so his message, though, rings true. I mean, there were just hundreds of people there, and I wish that were the norm and not the exception. And I mean, that's why the Ohio Religious Coalition for Reproductive Choice exists, to make people know that there's an alternative message and voice out there that you can be pro-faith, pro-family, and pro-choice. And so we're proud to have him as a partner in this work, and also, of course, as one of our national board members for the RCRC. But yeah, just a good man all around.
Yeah, it looked like an amazing event from what I saw on Twitter. So
yeah, I mean, where else are you going to hear someone say, like the job of Dr. Parker as a Christian and all Christians is to show other non-Christians that Christians can be moral, and to say things like abortion restrictions are nothing more than just an attempt to put women in their place. Like, he gets it. And to be able to speak that clearly about, how important faith and personal decisions are. We need to honor that and respect it. And he does that so well. And I think that's also what we need to push things forward and really argue for, keeping abortions accessible and clinics open, like in Toledo.
Yeah, and I think one of the pieces that fascinates me with his story is that he didn't always come from this point. He was very evangelically raised, and that, not at the beginning of his religious path, but when he went away to college and medical school, kind of fell into kind of the birthing of the religious right and the moral majority kind of movement in the 1980s, which really did birth the anti-choice movement we know today. And so he was very much immersed in that abortion was very immoral, and, you couldn't provide abortions as a Christian and those kind of things. And to listen to him talk about the transition he made from that to this, God called me to be an abortion provider perspective he has today was very interesting, and talks a lot about how we can bring people in and meet people where they are and say, you don't have to kind of drop your Christianity to believe this is an okay choice for somebody to make, and to, advocate for that position. Yes. He's just a great speaker. He just has like an amazing tone of voice too, that just like you could just sit there and listen to him all day long.
And he's just sincerely, genuinely welcoming. I mean, he welcomes dialogue. He wants, anti-choice people to sit there and hopefully come to a better place of openness and understanding and compassion, because that's what it's about. Because really, do you want to side with the antis and their picketing and just strident hatefulness?
Yeah.
How is that representative of one's spirituality and religion?
As a bumper sticker once reminded me, God save me from your followers. Because sometimes the stuff that comes out of some of these Christians is some of the most anti-Christian stuff I hear. So let's get back to the good stuff. Let's love. Let's take care of each other.
And that's a lot harder. It takes more moral courage than
Way
just
more.
Be mean.
While he was speaking, there was an artist during his event. We got to see the final product. You want to talk about how that kind of worked?
Oh gosh, it's gifted. I don't know a technical term for vocation, but someone who, as someone is live preaching or speaking, will just kind of illustrate, main points, and just a powerful representation of Dr. Parker's just moral voice. So we should put that in the show notes as well, because it speaks volumes in and of itself, to recognize that all of us and none of us are in need of reproductive health rights and choice. And it's good stuff. So check it out.
Yeah. Definitely put that image in the show notes.
Sure. Okay. So that was past events, future events. Let's get it on. We talked about the state Supreme Court, downtown Columbus, September 12th, 9 a.m., hearing in the state Supreme Court building.
Actually, more importantly, though, that same day is primary election day in Toledo. We're not taking sides on candidates on this one, but because a lot of people are going to the polls that day to vote, and it's a good place to catch a lot of people, we will have some canvassers out at a couple of the polling locations, handing out the phone number, or just actually handing people a prepaid cell phone with the number already dialed in, ready to call, to get a bunch more calls into ProMedica. So if you're in the Toledo area and want to help out on that, email the volunteer at prochoiceohio.org or get in touch with us via Facebook, and we can get you hooked up with that.
Speaking of canvassers, if you check out our website, prochoiceohio.org, again, link in the show notes, we are going to be hiring some canvassers in the Shaker Heights neighborhood. Kelly Copeland just sent me the application information to be added to the website today. So these are paid gigs throughout the month of September, door to door, through the Patients to Advocates program. So if you're in Cleveland, the east side of Cleveland, and you'd like to not just volunteer, but actually work with us through the month of September, there'll be information about a paying gig there. So fun canvassing stuff. And then down in Columbus on September 19th is the Mini Golf Classic. So we've talked about that before. Form a team, raise some money. That should be a good event. And then the last event that we got is going to be in Youngstown the following day, September 20th. Our microphone training and messaging training for volunteers to learn how to talk about all of these attacks on abortion access, attacks on reproductive rights, to learn sort of where we are in the state of Ohio in terms of, clinic status and political status. So a nice training. That'll be the evening of September 20th in Youngstown.
And to backtrack, because I totally forgot this until just now, on August 30th, so next week, a week from like 5 days from now, it's next Wednesday, the Toledo Clinic Protection Ordinance is having its public hearing in committee with Toledo City Council. So that is the 30th at 3 p.m. We'll make a Facebook event for it. It'll be up on our Facebook page.
Okay.
You should come support the clinic. It'll be fabulous.
If you look for these in the show notes, there'll be an actual chronological order.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
We're a little all over the place today.
Yeah, well.
Oh, well. There's a lot to talk about.
Yes. We'll see everybody next week.
Bye.
Bye-bye.